Hey everybody, welcome back to your favorite sleep aid, that is Wargaming Dragon Deep Dive. Today we're gonna look at the sort of last coalition? Not quite. I was gonna say the last coalition with Red Dragons, because up until then we would have gone over all the nations, but actually Yugoslavia, sorry. And Finland would still be missing, but both times they're in coalitions that include nations over which we kind of already went. But we'll get there when we get there. Whether I'll do the nations individually or I'll do it in a coalition perspective, because certain units are not taken very frequently in their coalition, but you might very much choose to make a nation. But it is a whole can of worms that I'm not gonna open today. We're gonna look at our dragons today, and yeah, they're the namesake of the game, and yet they're always kind of lacking. They have some really good stuff in there, and on paper, even with what they're lacking, you might think, or this I sometimes think, that oh my god, this should really pop off, but it just never really happens. I think they're in a decent spot now, but it is what it is. Either way, Jeep CVs. This is the only like 6+ per card CV I think that is amphibious. A good old boat Jeep. Looks really funny. It has like good mobility, and again, amphibious is actually kind of nice. In the 1 versus 1, it doesn't really matter that much, amphibious capabilities, but in team games and on certain team maps, it definitely can be really nice. If there's a lake in the middle of a zone, you can just hide your CV in there. Can be very helpful, can be very sneaky. Gotta keep in mind that lakes are usually at a slightly lower elevation, so especially if you park it at the edge of at the coast, can sometimes be very hard to spot. It's really mostly a nice to have kind of deal. But with the availability of Red Dragons in 1 versus 1s especially, you shouldn't really feel the need to take either of the Jeep CVs, at least assuming you have access to the tank CVs, because it will be 4 per card, just like the Infantry CVs, which is really good. Speaking of, it's a basic CV. Since Red Dragons does not have access to rocket pod helicopter transports, with anything bigger than S5s, you're stuck with MI8/MI8Ts, which they're not great, can still be decent to have, but they're by no means as impactful as an MI17 or MTV or K29 or Lynx H7 or a Panther. But there's the rocket pods. It can still be good to just have hover near your starting zone, or like on Plunging Valley or something like that, relatively close to your spawn zone, where opponent might try to sneak something behind to kill whatever is spawning. And if you have it hovering over a nearby forest or just at high altitude, can be good base defense against ground units. So yeah, by no means useless, but bigger incentive to go for ground transports, which is easier for getting them to frontline zones, right? Helicopter CVs are obviously not very good. This is basically the counterpart to the NATO M577. Basically identical, mostly when it comes to stats. 2 front to side, reasonably fast, amphibious, no weaponry. It's fine, and in this deck, even 5 per card, which is by no means bad. In fact, it's very good. And we have the tank CVs. I'm gonna compare them like that, because another infantry CV and another packed M577, right? It's kind of a similar thing to the AMX30 and Leopard 1 CV. In the past, I've always gone for the ZZZ. These days, I might actually be more of a fan of the John Maho. We lose 1 front armor, which is not... Obviously, you'd rather have the front armor, but we gain 1 side armor, and when it comes to high explosive damage, 4 versus 3 is by no means irrelevant. Obviously, you only have 1 top armor, which means that clusters, or if you get hit directly at top armor with high explosive, you will take full damage as opposed to reduced damage. These days, though, top armor for your CVs, at least in 1 versus 1s, in quote unquote normal team games, not as important. That said, if you really wanted tanks for frontline or zones that have to be contested, let's say center zone of Blood Ridge, that is where top armor really starts to matter a lot more. That's where you're gonna get ALG beat clustered a lot more. All that being said, though, neither CV is particularly survivable for these frontline scenarios. That's why you'd want a T72 CV or T80 UK. But if you're playing Red Dragons, obviously you don't have access to those. But if you're talking about 1v1s, I'd rather go for the John Maho. And the speed is also the same, so you say 15 points. But just like with the Leopard 1 and the AMX30 CV, practically speaking, the difference is probably not gonna matter that often, in all honesty. Right? It's sometimes what you gotta keep in mind. When I'm saying something like, oh, I think this CV is better than that CV, if you're talking about very similar CV stat-wise and such, it usually shouldn't really matter that much. Bobs and helicopters and trucks, supplies. Obviously, I don't think I need to go over those. Infantry. They have a very unique infantry tab. Only one ATGM in here, with a very basic, what's it, 9K 9K 11 17 or something. 16 AP. It's 10 points though, right? You can really spam it, and it is good for that thing. The problem is not that this ATGM is bad or anything. It's not. It's you have no alternative. And some decks, especially like Moto or whenever you don't have proper tanks, you really want the heavy hitter ATGMs, and you don't have access. Like you don't even have the choice in this deck, which is of course annoying. That said, you get some solid transport options. You get a 5-pointer, a fast 5-pointer with 1 armor, or a slow one with 2 front armor. I'd really go for the fast one in these weapon teams. Because the speed actually helps more when it comes to getting them safely to the front line than the 2 front armor, in my eyes. 10-point wheel transports. The VTT is a fun little IFV. I wouldn't recommend using it for. You could make it work, but I think if you're going for like a more expensive tracked transport, you should pair them with the Iglabas. It's when it comes to pure value, it is a ridiculously strong transport. Getting 4 mobile Iglas with 2 front armor even, and there's CPTU2, which is nothing crazy but by no means useless, is actually really good value. So this is like a very common combination. It's a very strong combination. That said, if you're playing Moto or Mech or something, there's honestly an argument to be made for one to be running 2 cards. But especially in Mech, you probably also want 1 card in a 5-pointer where you can really afford it with the slots. Like these 10-point AGMs with 5-point transports is just always a strong combination. Because every 10-point ATGM squad is good. I'm talking about proper ATGM squads and not the Dragon teams. In the honestly, any infantry squad in the MI8 you can essentially ignore, unless this is basically the only transport you have available. I think that might be the case, for example, for Yakian Days, which no, they only get the MI4 in mech. They don't get the MI8, right? Well, in that case, it's not really like an issue here, but a bit of a shame. Ivan Chongpo, they got 10 RPM now, and given that they're 10 points, especially in a 5-pointer, also really nice for spam. Wouldn't recommend putting them in unspec, because they're still kind of niche, in my eyes, as in some scenarios they're just going to be not very good at all. You gotta keep in mind, right, they're still only 5 HP, and against vehicles, their burst damage isn't very high, right? So if you have like a 3 or 4 stack shooting at a BMPT, sure, they'll tickle the BMPT, and then the BMPT in 2 seconds killed all 4 of those squads, right? Like against Soviets, they're not gonna be that useful in like your main front lines. But against other mech decks or motor decks, where you can 1 or double tap a lot of things, that's where they can really, really shine. And yeah, buffing the RPM from 7 to 10 really helped them. Nice card. Would also be really strong if they got the Hwasong Jong, but we don't want to overdo it with the transport, I think. Bo Jong-soo, not the best line infantry squad in the game. Not the worst, they have an RPG 7. Better than like Rifleman in my eyes. The squad itself, not the card. Very similar transport option. Instead of the MI8, they get the Korshun, which is a BMP1 with the Malyutka. It's actually a slightly faster Malyutka, right? Rule of thumb is just look at the guidance type. Like there's I don't know if that's how you're supposed to pronounce them. I don't know if you're supposed to pronounce the individual letters or if it's like Saklos. I'm just gonna say Saklos, right? If it's M-Class, Saklos, or SALH, SALH is like what, semi-active laser homing or something like that. Either way, class versus M class. Well, M class like manually something, right? It's M class is where you use like an actual joystick or something. Either way, look at the Korshun and compare that to the BMP1 or like East Germany. Not this one. Not this one. It's also the Malutka P. Do all the BMP1s have like the class variant? Take a look. 700, 500, right? Speed and acceleration, which is reasonably fast. Like, okay, I would say acceptable, right? If you look at Milan, for example, right? Milan is barely faster. Same goes for the Milan 2, by the way, and the Milan 3. They all have the same speed, right? Essentially, you can consider this a Milan. Slightly slower Milan. If you want to look at the base Malutka, like on a BVP. No. Wait, what? Ah, there we go. There's no hyphen. Base Malutka is much slower, right? I believe it actually starts out faster and then gets slower. I'm never sure because I think the Excel is also the starting speed or something like that. Either way, much, much slower. So the Susong Po and Malutka piece, just look at the SAC loss. That's where you know if it's like at least somewhat fast, right? Not quite as bad as normal Malutkas, but these really low tier ATGMs are pretty much not worth paying for. They can be okay, like with East Germany, where you can get them on veteran, right? That's where they can be okay because Modrits no shock. They can be okay, and they're especially Nick Demand, for example, experimented a good while with running Modrits in the BMP in the Malutka BMP1. Practically speaking, though, it's not really worth paying 5 points for. If you look at the BVP, right, the Yugoslavian one, which has the worst Malutka, it is a quote-unquote free ATGM, because even without the Malutka, the transport would be pretty good. And in that case, it's fine to have it. But paying what is essentially a 10-point IV and paying 5 points for a 14 AP ATGM, not worth it. It's just not worth it, especially because you come on trained or hardened, so the accuracy is not going to be that great. It's not like an absolutely useless transport, alright? But the Grom is not like, it's not on par with a proper autocannon. And even like a basic Marder 1 is what I'd consider a proper autocannon. So if you want like a cheap transport that can somewhat fight, I'd rather go for the VTT. It's cheaper, and the CPTU is honestly arguably better than the Grom. It has a bit less range, but you gotta keep in mind, the Grom has not a lot of range. Not a lot of base accuracy either, so CPTU is not that horrible. And in a pinch, it can at least, like in forts or something, 2 or 3 of those will definitely wreck helicopter. Same deal with this thing, right? It's not really worth it. Honestly, here's the funny thing. I think in Wargame they could have done what they are or were, I don't know what the current state is, trying in Warno, where ATGMs deal a lot of suppression damage. As in Wargame, your tanks don't need 5 years to calm down from panic to calm. So honestly, if they had, instead of 150 suppression, all ATGMs had like 250 or something, I wonder if then these would have been good. Or like, I don't know about good, but worth it, right? But that is like such a huge change that it needed to be experimented back when it was under active development. Either way, right? You either want to spam them in 5-pointers if you would just want the spam, or if you want crossing chunks but you don't want like a 10 HP squad, then run them. But usually if you see them, they're just going to be spammed with 5-pointers. And in this case, the BT50 makes a lot more sense because they're going to be your front line, you're tanking for your stuff, and in this case, the 2 front armor is going to be quite useful. Flamers, if you need flamers, it's really all that needs to be said. But of course, China has a very good 5-pointer in the form of the ZSD 63C. 2 front, 2 side with the 50 cal, very fast and amphibious and good autonomy. Not much more you can ask for. It's a very good 5-pointer. The wheel transport though is not so great. The beat here 152, right, which has the best off-road speed and only a PKT as well. So yeah. Gongma Your light infantry, they also benefited from the 10 RPM. It's the same ridiculous rifle as on the Fist squad. Obviously without HE, but they're 10 men and they have an MG. Also quite fast. It's a solid squad. It's not groundbreaking, but they also get a B tier ADA now, and these days without availability penalty, which is good. Or, now a 10-point KPVT transport on wheels. It's a a solid shock squad. But it's not quite on par with something like Nordansägere, which have a lot more range on the Hercules rifle. Or, of course, Eric's squads, which have a bit less range, but 25 freaking AP. But by no means bad. You see them frequently, and I think the main downside is there's nothing shiny about them. If you look at Lekka Pirota have another range samp. They have a better MG, right? They have basic assault rifle, basic MG, like honestly one of the worst MGs you could have, and the not so great Hercules rifle. Now with 10 RPM, they're a decent bit better, and a beat their IDA also gives them like another good thing about them at least. More flamers, which are always the same. Bad man pad, still a bad man pad, good man pad. Man pads are man pads, right? They're either good or bad. It's quite binary with them. You want at least 4 AG. You want decent range and decent accuracy. They have Stinger A range and accuracy, but they only have 3 AG. If they had 4 AG, they might be okay at 10 points. Because then you could really spam them. And with 4 AG, they can deal some significant damage, at least to helicopters. Against planes, they still need 3 hits, but they have good accuracy, right? I think 4 AG and they would actually be kind of okay. You'd probably still go for A-Glass because they have a good chunk more range. But the AG is just so bad. But yeah, basic A-Glass squads. And A-Glass are always good. Yagog Day, they're at least 20 points now. RPD got a rate of fire buff, so that's good. Solid, like, grind squads, right? 20 point, 15 HP shock squad with a good MG. Solid for them. It's not really something that you take very often these days, such a squad, because they are not particularly versatile as they really struggle against vehicles. And against vehicles, even like against 5-point spam, you either want at least lots of garbage squad yourself, so you just shoot a lot of like M72s or RPG7s, or you want something that can consistently one-shot them. And with the Yokok there, they're not quite cheap enough to properly spam, and their IT is just not good enough to easily deal with like 3 or 4 or 5-point just running at you, right? That's why their main role is to grind towns, which they're good at. It's just more of a question of, can you afford to take an infantry car that is specialized like that, right? The 90s variants are basically the counterparts, well, both of these are basically the counterparts to the respective special force squad that North Korea has. Just you trade the elite training for extra HP, right? Unfortunately, this is the best AT weapon that Red Dragons has. And that is honestly Red Dragon's biggest weakness in my eyes, is that the infantry-based AT is just so not good. It is emphasized even more by not having proper ATGMs, by their tank tab being fine, but like not outstanding, right? They don't have an M84A that can consistently make up for not having great AT. Not like the decks that have access to the M84A need that capability specifically, but something like that would help. So a lot of small things that are missing elsewhere really emphasize that problem even more. It's not like the Tab 693 is a bad anti-tank weapon. It's just, it sucks if that's your best anti-tank weapon, right? You don't have just a single squad like LSCR 40 are really helping a ton in Eastern Bloc, right? And if they had a squad like that, not specifically like LSCR 40, but a single, even if it's just a 1-card squad with an RPG 29, or something like an Eric's, or etc., that would help the deck a ton, and they don't have it. Whether or not they should have gotten that Chinese, like, really high-end recoilless rifle is, up to debate. I don't really have an opinion on it either way. It also depends on how Eugene would have implemented it. But that's annoying. The other issue is also that the squads that have this anti-tank weapon aren't particularly great in other ways, right? If they had like an MG3 or mini-me type MG and like a and or something like that to at least be like top tier against infantry as well. That would also help a bit, but either way, you really notice these capabilities. Red Dragons, I think their biggest weakness is being able to deal with like medium upwards vehicles at like these medium to close ranges. The center area of highway, held in a very small place, the middle part of Plunging Valley, having to deal with BMPTs, M84As, Leopard 2-1 spam, and Marder 2s in those areas, I think is where Red Dragon struggles the most, and where they just don't have good units for these roles. Their medium tanks aren't horrible. Their heavy tanks, or heavy tank, the one they have, isn't horrible, but they're not far up enough their respective food chain to make up for not having your Erics, your Vampire, your AT-12T, your M90 Strelzian, the thing that Yugoslavia has, your Apilas, your Panzerfaust 3. There's just nothing to make up for that. And as a result, I think this is where the biggest weakness is. And where these guys, while again not being horrible, are just. I think it makes them appear worse than they are, because these are the squads you buy, or special force squads you buy when you need those capabilities, and they will still disappoint, even though that's kind of their role. So, yeah. Yukvide, same as the Chinese reservists. Some people love them. I really hate them. Hate is maybe a strong word, but I'm not a fan of these reservists. Not saying they're bad. I just much rather prefer the 5+5 point reservists. When they're 15 points, you suddenly, for the price of 3 squads of other reservists, you only get 2. Yes, you get the same HP in the infantry squads, but you're spread out to fewer units. You get 4 units instead of 6. You get 3 transports instead of 2. And in some cases, you also lose the 2 or even 3 front armor or the 50 cal in those transports, which is by no means irrelevant. But yeah, just having less bodies is always bad, because in that case you can less abuse, in a way, overkill damage, right? If all the HP was just concentrated on a single unit, overkill would basically never be an issue. But if you have like 3 10 HP squads instead of 1 30 HP squad, and you're going up against 3 HP tanks, they all need 4 shots to kill the respective 10 HP squad, right? Which means 6 entire overkill damage. On a 30 HP squad, they need 10 shots in total, for example, as opposed to 12 shots in total. But yeah, more units is always better, like more individual units in that case, when you just want to tank stuff. Plus, it also like widens your front line, gives you more line of sight, etc., etc. Lijian base, they're probably your best pure town grinders, like point for point. While Lijian 90 will absolutely have a lot more DPS, especially with the FHJ 84. A few 5-pointers and they really start to struggle. They're not like entirely useless against the odd 5-point transport, but when you're really going up against spam, that's where they really start to struggle. Whereas with Lijian, you can like add like a WC 551 or Lijian 290 squad or something, and they will be fine. Lijian 90 do get the WC 551 themselves, so that is a neat combination. And I actually do like running Lijian 90. It's just that sometimes they can be really annoying, because depending on what like you go up against, it's really hard to make use of them. Whereas Lijian base, they can still like sneak around and be annoying to when it comes to sniping CVs and such. Lijian 90, not so much. They're both fine. You just gotta be aware, of course, with the napalm launcher. One thing to keep in mind: for one, the Type 85 SMG for some reason gets 5% free accuracy. It's actually one of the best primary weapons. The other thing is their SMGs are silent. Now, how can I space? Okay, because the A and the I, they're special characters, I think. Yeah, I can't just search for Jan, right? Jan. I would need the special character, but either way, primary weapon. You see, it's noise 1 for the respective SMGs. Noise is essentially a multiplier. Means if you get shot at, the range at which you can be spotted. If you shoot with a weapon, the range at which you can get spotted by taking stealth factors and something as multipliers into account is getting multiplied by that noise factor. Meaning, if you had a noise value of 2 and you fire a weapon, you can get spotted at twice the distance. If you have a noise value of 1, that distance doesn't change when you fire. Right? If you look at the Type 69 2.66, the MG 2.25, Type 64 1. So it literally doesn't matter if you fire a SMG or not, whether you get when it comes to getting spotted. Spotted by units, of course. If you fire and your opponent notices their squad loses HP, or they see the visual effects of a weapon being fired, obviously they know your squad is there. But it's still very funny. And I think in the very early beta, because I think this wasn't an Errant battle yet, when they implemented this in Red Dragon, I think 1 or 2 patches or something, there was, I think, a negative value actually for some of the noise. Some of the weapons, meaning that for a while, units actually got stealthier when firing them, which was really funny. Then we have the Lujan Dui and Lujan Dui 90. And Lujan Dui are basically Mordschützen, meaning also very efficient in town grinding. There's quite a few of those that Red Dragons have. Lujan Dui 90 are actually really good at 20 points. Really good in force against light vehicle spam, even medium vehicles, but 525 meters means you basically have to use them in forests. Not very good at defending forests through the open because of the lack of the range, but for 20 points, quite the package. Very good transport. So WC5F1, I haven't mentioned it yet, and the ZSC90, both amazing transports. WC5F1 sort of being held back by the fact that the squads it has available to it, not the greatest / cheapest. Not the greatest might be an exaggeration, but unlike the XA185 KT, you don't get 10-point line infantry, right? Which is a huge, huge deal. Meaning you can't spend as much, or for the price. But it's a 2 front armor with a solid autocannon on wheels, which is really strong. And the ZSC90 has 4 front armor, is fast, and has medium optics. Also very good IFV, but also not available for 10-point line infantry. Whether or not there's a whole thing with a DLC bias, such as Finnish squads getting their XA185 KT for that line infantry, well, different story. But at the end of the day, I think it's better that while it would help this deck quite a lot, I think we shouldn't add more fuel to that type of fire when it comes to game balance. And it's not really what the deck needs. Right? But yeah, both squads very good. WC transport and ZSC transport very, very good. PW1, basically an Igla with 5 HE. I don't think it's quite Igla N. That's the Igla N also is 5 HE, right? The prototype. Actually, let's just do it like this. Igla lock slot. No, range is the same, accuracy is the same. No, so basically it's just an Igla N. Alright. It is an Igla N, which is good. Just good. About 5 AG. Thriller 2 is not very good. Tankachasho. They're not really worth taking because of Fibonacci Poe. And because you have the 85 variants. 85 variants actually very good. Very strong, specifically with the WC5F1. Honestly, it's actually one of the best infantry cards in the game. Especially in openers and medium to low intensity engagements, just so good at a lot of light vehicles and such. Just Tankashasho either just one shot or get him down to 1 or 2 HP. WC finishes him off. Same with infantry. Tanka deal a lot of damage to the infantry and panic them and such. WC finishes it off. They're fast. They for infantry squads, deny a lot of range. Very good defensively. Incredibly strong package. Very good. I love this card. Also good in the ZST90. But if you have them available in the WC, just take him. Honestly, even 2 cards. Just take them and spam them. Very strong. And I think sometimes people underrate that. Yakyunde, Yakyunde 90. Like I said earlier, basically the elite variant of the respective shock squads. Same thing and same problem, right? They're not horrible themselves, but not good enough to really be a huge game changer. Peter 88 is good though. Yubei you went over, and then Shanshi. Probably the best line infantry spam that Red 4 has. Red 4 doesn't really have the same amount or like quality generally of the line infantry spam that Blue 4 has, right? I think that's really the only line infantry squad with a great 5-pointer, right? Because the other 5-pointers are what? The MTLPV, 1 armor. The BTR 50s, they either have 2 front armor and the basic 7.26mm MG, like the Czech one, or they're only 45 kmh, like the North Korean one, plus they only have 1 side armor. And then there's the ZSC 63C, which is the only really great one, unless I'm mistaken. At least the only great one available to line infantry. Maybe there's like a 5-pointer that's really good. Not available to line infantry, like the Stormer for UK, but different story. Either way, Shanshi themselves, very good for 10 points. RPG 7 is good. It's a fine MG, but then we have the ZSD. Good 5-pointer. It's really only good transport they have. The 985 variant, have the ZSD 90 and the WC 551. But they're for 5 points, they don't gain that much. Like, the AT weapon isn't horrible. Kind of Carl Gustav here. It has more AP than the Carl Gustav, but it also only has 40% accuracy as opposed to 60. And honestly, I'd rather have the accuracy. They miss all the time, especially because line infantry, they're gonna be panicked relatively fast. And then they're just gonna miss. They're not one of the worst 15-point infantry squads in the game. Arguably the worst. It depends on what you value. Gewehrmann 85, for example, aren't really great for 15 points either, having 16 AP, 20 RPM though, and a tank weapon. But I get the MG3, right? Shanti are probably better than those, I'd argue, if you just look at a pure squad. They have good transport, right? You can also spam the WC with them, but I think if you're going for the 30 point, which is the cheapest you get, WC spam, you're better off running with a tank Shasho. 3090 also good. Maybe with a ZSD, it's a better option in the town case, because I feel like getting like in the towns faster thanks to the wheels is a lot more important for the tank case than the Shanshi. So getting for the slow push, maybe they're better in the ZSD than the tank case, but other than that, if they hadn't the WCs and the ZSDs, I don't think you'd ever see them. They're really bad for 15 points. The individual squad. Support. Maybe the strongest tab of this deck. BM24, one of the best MLRs in the game. The Chinese BM24. 8 HE. It's a big 8 HE, right? That's one thing you have to keep in mind. The Lars 2 has, I think, 7 HE, right? Let's look at the BM24. And then let's look at for example, Lars 2, 7 HE, right? You'd think that the difference wouldn't be that huge. But then look at the splash radius. 144 versus 66. It's more than double the splash radius. And it's radius, right? Not like area, calculated area, it's radius. So the actual area is more than, like, the multiplier is a lot more than twice as much. A lot more than the multiplier of the radius value, right? So it's much, much bigger radius. It's still significantly bigger for the suppression, but the multiplier there is not quite as big. It has 30 seconds aim time, but it's also really light on supply. Supply per cost is actually a bit lower than the Lars, but then you have to keep in mind the Lars 2 fires a lot more often because it reloads faster. And even the individual salvo has 6 more shots, 18 versus 12. The BIM-24 is very light on supply. The individual salvos are very impactful. You can get away with not running, like, you can easily get away with not running a FOB. I've done that plenty of times. Instead of a FOB, just take 2 cards of 15-point supply trucks. And you'll only really start running into, like, using your second card late throughout the game as well. Because you don't have a lot of ATGMs in general to resupply as well. Red Dragons can be incredibly light on supply. one of the best MLRs in the game. Arguably the best, depending on what you value and how you look at it. Yeah. The only downside of the PM24 is it doesn't have the low aim time, right? Like a Eurogun or a Lars 2, so it's not the greatest at reacting to enemy pushes. But yeah, it's incredibly good. PHL81 is your, well, basically an RM70 cluster, right? Except you get 40 instead of 80 rockets. It's okay if that's what you want. I think those low AP clusters are better than the PM27 cluster that East Germany gets. Not the greatest though. Napalm BM24 are useless. Maybe you have seen the recent. What did I play? Was it East Germany support? Modo? I think it was support, right? I spent lots of Wachregiment, but I think it was support. And used the East German BM24, which is the same one as this Napalm. It's not good. It's just not good. BM21, it's usable, but it's on the lower end of usable, right? So there's no reason to run it when you have the BM24. Strela Igla Pongre 3, that's a Streltan M, which is fine. It's an Igla, which is basically the Igla bus, but you get 3 times as many Iglas. If you run the Igla bus, there's no real reason to run this. And even if you don't in the Infantry tab, you have very good non-radar AA. While this is actually a pretty solid unit, and I think there's a deck here or there that would love to have this, because it carries a lot of Iglas, has a CBTU as a backup for like close range helicopters or something, to front armor. I think there's a few decks that would run this. In Red Dragons, there's maybe one reason or one deck where you'd run this or two, like mech or armored, but in both scenarios, or okay, maybe armored, because in mech you would definitely run the Hwasong Chong in the Infantry tab. In armored, if for some reason you don't want to or can't afford to run the Hwasong Chong, maybe that is an option. But other than that, it's not because it's a bad unit, quite the opposite. Also, there's a Malyutka on the model, which is funny. Just there's so many overlaps. No real reason to run this. It's not horrible, but HQ7, Pro Time we went over this last time. One of the best, in some areas, arguably the best anti-air unit in the game. Very versatile, very strong, very consistent, fast. Yeah. HQ61A, one of my favorite AA pieces. Doesn't quite have the range of like a Book M1, but for 60 points, having good range, good accuracy, and 9 HE is a steal. Yes, you only carry 2 missiles, so you have to basically buy 15 points supply truck very, very early. Actually, let's take a look. How many missiles do you get for one supply truck? One supply truck is 800, like the 15.1. So you get like what, 6 shots. It's not bad. Sorry, 4. 4 is like what? 4 is like 700. 700 supplies for 4 shots. It's not bad. And you have 100 supply left over. By no means bad. It's good. It's just good. I love it. BGC 80, I love this as well. This is like the holy trinity. Like usually when I run 3 cards of A's, it's like I always run these if I have these, and then this would be my third option. This is my holy trinity of AA in this deck. BGC 80 also very good. Crazy good range, 6 armor, and very good denial against like anything helicopter based. Like it stuns very fast, gives you a lot of coverage for the price. But it's not even useless against ground units. It does have the range, but has the armor. Just very good. Cheap, you can spam them as base defense, use them offensively, just deal with a bit of chip damage. If you get lucky and deal a bit of chip damage, the HQ61 will finish off the plane, right? Very, very good. PGC 88, what it lacks in killing power, it makes up for survivability / cheapness. Can be in like 10 years ago, let's say. The meta kind of used to be having cheap radar AA in front of your expensive radar AA, right? Especially like pivots in Patriot was a very common combination. You still see them often, but the whole like using radar meteors not that common these days. Not like useless, but I think most people don't run it anymore. The DPS of this is horrible though. 1 shot every 1 second. Just for reference, right? Gepard fires a shot every 5 shots every 2 seconds. So it has Gepard has 2.5 times the rate of fire for 10 points more. But of course, again, 7 for an armor. Which means that 20 AP seed missiles will not one-shot you. 20 AP seed missiles, for example, the AGM-88 harm? The high-end Blue 4 seed missile has 20 AP, for example. So there's some neat little interactions in there. And of course, rocket pods and such will deal very little damage to you. They will stun you still, but deal very little damage. But again, your DPS is horrendous. But on the other hand, again, the range, well, you don't have the DPS, you have range of like a high-end spec. Plus armor that is only rivaled by the marksman systems. So, but on the other hand, right, I think most of the time it's much better to have a spec that can actually kill stuff. But also, of course, make the argument, well, for 10 points more, you get even more armor than the PGC-80, a lot more range for the planes, and presumably, even though you have half the HE, still higher DPS against helicopters. Still, I'd argue the PGC-80 is better, but, if what you want is like a somewhat spammable, tanky AP, 88 is by no means a bad unit. Just be aware it's not going to kill a lot of stuff. PGC-95, on the other hand, do I still have this open? I do. It's an absolute. It has a high rate of fire in the Gepard at 0.3, so fires like 6 2/3 per 2 seconds, which is like I guess 3 1/3 shots per 1 second, which is really good, really high. The same as the does the Tunguska have 0.2 or 0.3? I always forget. I think it has 0.2. The Tunguska has 0.2, and it doesn't get higher than that. 0.3 is still very, very good of a shot reload here, by the way, in case you're not wondering what I'm looking at. Like, the DPS of this thing is amazing. Really good gun. Has Mistral man pads on this fricker, right? Fire forget that it can fire at the same time, 4 in a row before having it reload for 20 seconds. This, like a 9 out of 10. The only thing that could be better is like an automatic, or if the gun was even higher to fire or whatever. What makes this unit, what makes the entire unit not a 9 out of 10, and maybe like in my eyes, like a 6 out of 10, is this down here. Autonomy, I can still kind of live with that. 450 isn't that bad, especially given the speed. But the armor, it's the armor. The thing with specs is, specs have to be relatively close to the front line, because they don't have the range of surface-to-air missiles, like a Crotal, like an HK-61, against planes and helicopters respectively. Which means that one armor, front and side, means it just gets instantly popped by like an random AMX and random cheap ass ATGM, right? Stuff like that one-shots it all the time. Artillery, high explosive, will deal 100% of its damage, right? Two lucky 580 mortar shells, you're dead, right? That is the problem with this unit. It dies so quickly, and at 70 points, I struggle to spend like the points on this unit. It's not a bad unit. It's just that because of its lackluster survivability, for its cost and for how close it has to be to the front line, it's usually much better to just invest into the HQ line. Because yes, they have no armor, and in this case even 5 HP, but they don't have to stay close to the front line, and they're wheeled. So they're in a safer position from the get-go. In this case, even has the same survivability with armor, right? That is the shame with this unit. If this was cheaper with only the gun or only the missiles, you see this all the time. Because at a cheaper price point, the lowest survivability is not as much of an issue, right? But 70 points with 1 armor and being close to the front line, that's just hard to justify in my eyes. Again, it's not a bad unit, and if you can keep it alive, it will murder stuff. But yeah. The P8 Napalm, again, they used to be really good in like beta days or something when they had like 7 HE and were kind of like a Buratino with actual HE, but they're not anymore. And since then, Not so great. Better than a BM24, but not amazing. That is kind of like an M109-ish. 6 HE only. So, sorry, I should probably also get rid of this. 6 HE only, so not the most damage, not the biggest AoEs. It's fine. If you want to spam like howitzers, it can be fine. That's basically an Akacia. Or Acacia. Hongay 2. So for 5 points less, or on the other hand, for 5 points more, depending on how you look at it, you have 15% less accuracy, which is huge. You gain 350 meters range versus planes and 175 versus helicopters. Helicopter range is whatever. Plane range is nice, but losing 15% accuracy for the same availability, I want to say. Yeah, it's the same availability. No, hold on. Same availability, yeah. 5 points is whatever at this price range when you buy 1 or 2 of those until they die at least, right? So HQ61, the accuracy is just so good for the price. Kind of like an Akacia, but for the same price, you have lower AG and worse armor. It's 122 versus 152 is quite a difference. Then with that 130 though, this one is interesting. With the Italy DLC, I think I'm looking at the right one, right? It's 130, yeah. Because it's actually kind of a modern unit. 8 got a 10-second aim time. So it's the finally Red Dragons has a 10 seconds aim time artillery piece. It is kind of unique in the sense that it's the only 10-second howitzer, I think. Well, with the exception of like the Saxton or whatever South Africa has. That has none 7 AG. It's of course a good chunk cheaper, weaker, but it's also cheaper and even 4 per card. It's not bad by any means. Arguably the best howitzer they have. Depending on the cogs on the 152 Tokton. Yeah, if you want a howitzer, it should be probably your go-to. 152 Tokjon is your M109 variant. Basically, you can spam it. It's cheap, high availability. Doesn't have the range, even less range in the M109. I mentioned it with the M109, and on some maps like Highway to Seoul, you will notice the lack of range. It does come with 40 shots though, so you don't have to like necessarily park it near the fob. But on some maps, if you want to spam this and use it offensively, you might have to drive up a bit. It also doesn't have a very good survivability for counter battery, by the way, which doesn't matter as much with 50-point artillery pieces, but just maybe don't keep them in a, like right next to each other because they can die pretty quickly with no armor, basically. Koksan is your worst Pivonka. It only has 9 AG, which is a shame. Still has like the 35 seconds aim time and such. I don't think... Does it have like a... There's actually a chance that it might have a... Oops. Somewhat better... No, it has the same fire pattern. It also costs more supply than the Peon, but it's because of the... Where is it? Where's the dispersion? There it goes, dispersion. It's more accurate than a Peon, but has lower HE than a Peon, right? So, not so great. It's not bad, but... Oh, you can't see this. There you go. It's not so bad, but... It's a bit of a shame. Type 80 is the same as the PGC 80, but it has one less... Oh no, it's the Finnish one that has one less front armor. I always forget. There's one of them that has 5. I have no idea if that's intentional or not. Shilka used to be like a go-to cheap spag. Shilka just has all the Shilkas and Biryusas. Their issue is they fire a burst and then they have to reload for ages. Right, salvo length of 15, which they fire really fast. I guess 3 seconds isn't that long. I think it got buffed in the Italy patch, but that's the problem of the Shilkas and such. They have the pretty small magazines, and if they don't kill the unit in that magazine, they can frequently die. Spag does not have this issue, right? It's a different kind of gun. It's a 30mm gun, and it's actually a solid Spag. Even has 2 front and 2 side armor. It's even higher ratified than the Gepard. Not the same accuracy though, and horrible stabilizer, but not the fastest either, right? It's not bad, it's just pretty average. Like it's solid for 55 points, but that's basically about it. 3 G motors, but 5 G motors. Very good ones even, especially the North Korean one, that's 60 rounds. Good 5 G motor. Thanks. Lots of hits, lots of misses and a few hits. The Chonma Ho line. Go for the first, right? This is basically a T62D with the worse armor. KPVTs over 50 cals are mostly not that big of a deal. They can certainly help in scenarios where you're having to kill like lots of 5-pointers in close range and you can't one-shot them and the KPVT will finish them off. Certainly nice. But you'd much rather have like a high rate of fire gun, because that makes you a lot more versatile as fire support. They don't have optics, they don't have speed. Now from Tomahawk 2 variant upwards, they can actually kind of punch quite well above their weight. Like 16 AP with almost full range at 40 points. That is even better than the Norwegian Leopard 1 that has like 15 AP, and does that one even have like 1925 meters only? Let me double check something. Leopard 1. No, it has 2100 meters, but it is also 45 points. It can punch up quite well for the price in like forest and such, but also only 6 RPM, and then you're supposed to punch up at close ranges, but you're slow, and you're gonna crawl through forests. And that's the problem with like these punching up units that are also really slow. It just doesn't work. That's the same problem with the chieftains. Low speed, but like the quote unquote punching up stat line don't work well together. John Maho 4 at least is like full range. So it can't be like decent at like long ranges against anything that, is like a medium tank or something. Has a Strela 2M, good old Strela tanks. It's a fun little unit. It can be okay. Medium optics is good. It has a really good gun for the price, like AP and range wise and accuracy even. Stab, but especially RPM. Really lacking though, obviously. But if you look at the Leopard 105 for 65 points, you lose 1 AP and you lose 2 armor, but you gain 4 RPM. It's fine. It can be okay. Tomo 5 is a solid medium tank. Great AP, good RPM, auto loaded. 16 armor is good. It's basically like it's a Leopard 2A1, but for 10 points less, you gain 1 AP, but you also lose 15 kmh and 1 RPM. But especially the speed is again so noticeable. Speed is just so important, and I think over the past, like with each year over the past decade, I think people, including me, started to realize how important that speed that is, just to keep your tanks alive, but also to follow up and like hunt down tanks or units, right? And this biggest problem of this tank, and biggest difference to a unit like the M84A, which has again a similar stat line actually, but it's like 20 kmh faster, and you notice that a lot. And the KBVT is not a huge deal. Like it's nice, but like it's not like on an autocannon level where you notice the difference to like a 50 cal or something. Kitaro and Sinhung, this we mentioned the USSR and like Eastern Bloc and such. It's not really worth it. Sinhung, also not worth it. I think all I need to say. D62D, every now and then you see some strats with like armored or even unspec where this tank is being spammed. It has good survivability for the cost. And 50 cal is nice to have as fire support. And since it survives a lot, up front at least, for the cost, having 50 cal versus a normal gun is of course, over time makes a lot of difference because it can fire for longer because it survives longer. That said, I'm not entirely convinced of this. 6 RPM is quite lacking. It's still very, very vulnerable for the side. At the same time, you're 25 points, but a bit more would be nice because autocannons will shred you. It's fine. It's solid. In tank, in armored, of course, with the veterancy, the gun becomes a lot more consistent. It's fine. It's a solid spam tank. It's on the more expensive side of spam tanks, but it's also a lot more on the tanky side of spam tanks. You need 24 AP to one-shot this, right? Not even spikes one-shot you up front. Now this is an odd one. 18 AP for 60 points is quite a lot. Once again, punching up. You have a bit more speed than a John Mahone with 60 kmh. You also don't have full range though. So it's like comparable to a full range 17 AP gun. Assuming you can fire, of course. You get outranged, you can't fire back at max range, which is annoying. You also only have 12 armor. So if you try to get in close range against super heavies or something in force, you get a one shot. Between these two, I think I'd rather have the John Ho with full range, meaning that it's at least defensively, like in the open, more versatile than a T-72M. But again, not really great tank. I've seen people try to make use of this, but the lack of range for the price, you do notice it. And the stabilizer trying to hunt down units, just not being able to hit, also you definitely notice this. Yes, you can attack move, but if your opponent keeps reversing, eventually you have to stand still, and if you stand still, then you drive out of range while you're aiming. Whoop-de-doo. T90. It's a super heavy. Yep. It's good, it's fine. Nothing special. It has an autoloader, 4 HE, good armor, good gun. What more? You get what you see, right? There's nothing special about this. In a bad way. Type 59 is basically a T55A, but you get a KBVT. You still have the bad optics that a T55A has, right? Again, bad optics is even worse than poor optics, and you notice it quite a bit. And that is, I keep saying this, in my eyes, the biggest downside of the T55A, and why this T55A spam and such doesn't really work even in armored, because the optics are bad, not poor. Because very often these spam tanks will be actually at your frontline, or will be your frontline, and just being so blind hurts so much. The 1 or I variant gives you a much stronger gun. So in a sense, you can try to punch up, but you won't spot shit. You won't get to shit because you're slow. And again, that hurts the punching up part. And then for 10 points more, you get Threllas. At least you have 4 optics now, so you can even at least spot a normal tank that shoots at you from a forest at certain ranges. That's good. And if you're moving around in armored, you get these elite Strela 2s, of course, which is funny. So that is something you can do. As said, he has an interesting little unit. I tried it every now and then because for 20 points you get medium optics, which is really funny. Probably not intended. It's like a 1975 unit. It's funny though, and the gun is actually pretty okay. Like 3 HE at 8 RPM, not the worst, and even a 50 cal. And very good speed. That's like for 20 points having only 2 armor. If this was in the Recon tab, different story. Which is basically the Type 63, I think. Spoilers. 5 points more though. And a worse MG. But yeah, CDS is a fun unit. It's like it either looks really strong or really weak on paper, at least in my mind, because 3 armor for 40 points is nothing. And unlike an M8 AGS, you don't get 13 RPM autoloaded. But you get a Bastion, which is even stabilized. It's also very fast. And a very strong gun. And you're pretty fast off-road. So it has an interesting role. You just gotta avoid tanks. As stupid as it sounds, just don't get shot at. Would probably be really busted in the Recon tab, but maybe also really cool. It's fun. It's not a must-have unit, but it can be really fun to use. I like it. It's just very glass cannon, of course, right? Just gotta use it at the right opportunities. And you can, of course, in theory, just get a 4-second drive up to a heavy tank in close ranges and just kill it with one salvo. Or you also just get one shot by anything with 21 AP, 17 AP heat, right? So you can also lose them very, very quickly if you do something like that. The Bastion helps a lot, though. Even to deal with like threats that you struggle against, right? Martyr 2s and such, or like I3s that can murder you at close ranges. You just kill them with your Bastion and then drive up. Pretty good long-range fire support against, again, anything that isn't a tank. That's basically a T-55A, so it struggles, and that's the cares about this. It's like your best marine tank, I think. It's not entirely useless. It has a 105mm gun. I don't know if that's like basically an L7 that got imported or something. Either way, strong gun for 45 points again. To this one. Again, you like speed, but you have medium optics, so that's nice. But you can definitely try to bully some tanks at close ranges with this. Just gotta be careful. You're not the most tanky tank yourself. The CTCs are all actually pretty solid. The 80 variant, the kind of like Leopard ones, the 105mm variants, is on a somewhat squishy side. Have a solid gun usually for the price. Right, 88B has medium optics and a good gun. 88A now has 13 armor. It's maybe now your best medium tank. 60 kmh is still not the fastest, but 17 AP with 13 armor at 9 RPM and full range and good accuracy. It's a very solid tank. It's like a Leopard 105 NO2, but you trade 1 armor for 1 RPM. It's a pretty good tank. Not the fastest, but fast enough. 85-2 is in an awkward spot. Doesn't quite have the damage output. Doesn't quite have the armor. Doesn't quite have the speed. It's kind of like a jack of all trades and master of none. And at 65 points, that's not quite good enough. Doesn't really have a role. Can't really push very good for its price. Can't really defend very well for its price. For the same price, if you want to defend, just get a CTQ. Yes, you lose armor, but you have stealth and optics. 85-A. You get this in moto, but you also get this in moto, so. For 10 points more, you get 1 armor, which is neat. You get an outloader, which is neat. You get 2 AP, which is neat. You're slower, which is meh, and you have lower RPM, which is ugh. Yeah, I'd rather stick with the 88A. It's fine, but 85-3. It's okay. I love this tank. It's not particularly great. I just like it. I just like using it. I don't know why. 7 side armor means you get one shot by spikes to the side. It's not the fastest. It's like pretty slow tanks all around, right? Not quite chieftain or even challenger level, but not much higher, admittedly, right? Leopard 2 line, for example, is 70 kmh. Nothing here reaches 70 kmh except like these two things. 60 is like I would say on the usable level for like a proper tank, but on the lower end of usable level. 19 armor isn't the greatest for 140, but you can punch quite hard with 7 RPM only. So you have to really peekaboo with this, right? You can't just sit there and tank stuff, especially if you're trying to punch up, because you don't have the best armor for the price, especially side again. But pretty good availability, pretty good gun. Yeah, just peekaboo with this. In and out of cover. Good autonomy is very nice though. Recon tab. Pretty low amount, but some good stuff in here. BRDM 1 and BRDM 2, they're whatever. BRDM 2, of course, is really nice, but you have so much stuff in here that you really want to take, honestly. This is okay. Got buffed to 8 missiles at some point. I don't know if it was South Africa. I think it was South Africa variant. Looks really ugly. Looks really poor. I don't know if that's because the model is bad or because, North Korean vehicles. Problem with this is mainly that the ATGM fires like every 5 seconds. It's a single tube, so it has to reload after every missile. And with only 1 armor, it does have stealth, which helps a lot. With only 1 armor, it's still very squishy. And the AGS is just useless. Because very often, what you get killed by is something that the AGS doesn't help against. You at 40 points and having an ATGM as your main missile, you never really want to draft this where you want to make use of your AGS 17. So it doesn't really work well together, which is a shame. Peter 48 is decent, PT76 is bad-ish. It's not great. It's not useless. I wouldn't recommend using this. Tab 63 is fine. At 25 points, you really would like to have more range, though. As a solid gun, actually, outside of that, 8 RPM 3H is good. It's fast. Has a 50 cal, even if it's lower end 50 cal. But it's not quite good enough. It's fine. It would just need a bit of range to be better. T55 is okay, but it really lacks in terms of killing power with like very low accuracy. Snipers, the BDR-80A, if you want them, it's if you just want some BDR-80As around, it can be a option, but usually you don't really care too much about the transports. I would always recommend running ground transports because helicopters are a lot less sneaky. And BDR-60s are reasonable in terms of autonomy and off-road speed, although not great, admittedly. D-Ren, these are arguably the best shock squads in the game. They have a good MG. They have 4 shock squad, a good anti-tank weapon, and because none of the shock recon squads have anything better than 20 AP. I'd say the best one is the one used by Commando Spada, which are, if you ignore transports, probably what I would consider the best recon squad. The Ren, however, have the WC551 transport, which is chef's kiss, coupled with a 700 meters range, good AP anti-tank weapon. Can't really get much better than that. The only better option really would be Commando Spada in this transport. That would probably be the strongest, or in the XA185 KT. But this is really, really good. Even the CCC is quite strong, which I think you even get in mech. Very good unit. And if you want the second cut in a helicopter, G9A is fine. The autocannon, just shreds. It's just not on a turret, so keep that in mind. It's like a Fennec 20mm, basically. Weekend helos take whatever you want. UACs, whatever. And the CTQs, they're all good. CTQ, of course, is kind of a must-have. It's very good. It's the OG recon tank until it got overshadowed by the Vercanning, P and PSV, M84AN. I think that's it, right? Yeah. Still, it's a very good unit, though. Like, very good to have. And the CTQ for the cheaper options, like, to compare this to the Type 63, right? You get the same gun, but 3 armor, you lose speed, and you're bigger, but the 3 armor is really nice to have. And a better MG. If you want it really cheap, you can take this, which works. It still has 3 AG, which is good. Use range, accuracy, AP, but you're also only 20 points. And against infantry, assuming you can fire or are in range, you're still pretty effective. And these things are whatever, right? It's a BDR-40A, which are fine. And that's a Jeep, which is whatever. Vehicles. Not so great ridiculous rifle Jeep because the good ones usually have 1575 meter range, or even more in the form of the Wombat, but it's also the only one you have available, so not horrible, but one of the worst ones. This is an interesting thing. It's basically like a hot one with less accuracy, but 25 points for a full range, like 26, 25 meters range. ATGM is actually kind of okay. Like mech or armored, where you get mech or motor, where you get veterancy. It's an M. It's basically Manutka, right? It's M class. It's really slow. Don't use this. It looks freaky though. I have to say, it's like a BRDM1. Oh yeah, it literally says in the name. The 550, really expensive. Dies very quickly, but also has lots of range, lots of accuracy, lots of AP. It just hits like a truck, right? It's also really fast. The missile, look at the speed. If you remember Milan, look at the speed difference. Huge speed difference. That thing hits like a truck, flies like a butterfly, and stings like a bee. Either way. Hard to justify sometimes in like 1v1s because it's so expensive and niche, right? You gotta make sure you stay out of tank range, right? You can't start firing this at 2,400 meters range. Your tank will just drive up, probably tank the shot, and just kill you in one shot, right? It's not worth it. But if you can make it work, that can just kill things left and right. Might get P, which is a bit faster, but still not good. Same with this thing. There's so many Malyutka variants. And this is basically the same, like on paper, looks to be the same as a basic Malyutka, but it has a speed of a Malyutka P. Wait, no, this is. Oh, I'm just so what? No, it has more accuracy. Okay, these variants, man. This is just bad. You might think like, oh, it's cheap, 10 points. You get what you pay for, which is basically nothing. SU-100 is actually not horrible. Like for 15 points, you get 4 armor, Decent range, 380, 8 RPM. Use accuracy, no turret though. And you're slow, and you have only bad optics, right? But it's a pretty solid, especially in mech, like cheap fire support option if that's what you want. Uptime time of a unit that really punches up. I don't think you get a stronger kinetic gun for the price, right? This is basically, if more or less the damage you get on a Leopard 2A1 for less than twice half the price. 18 AP, full range, good accuracy. Obviously, horrible stabilizer and only 6 RPM. I don't think this is outloaded either. And you really slow and have new optics, right? I mean, you for 40 points, there's gotta be a downside somewhere. Again, on paper, it could be like really good punching up, but it usually just dies. That's the sad part. It just dies because it doesn't have the speed to get where it needs to get before it gets killed. Or your opponent shoots with their medium tank and gets out of range before you can move up your PTZ to shoot back, right? That's the downside. It's hard to properly balance these. I think these just give it stealth or something. I don't know. PTC 89 at least has some speed and really good RPMs, so at least it can't be like an overpriced fire support vehicle. So if I had to choose between the two, I'd always go for the 89, honestly. Yeah. And it doesn't even have that much worse up. It also just looks cool, honestly. And 10 RPM is really neat. For some reason, this has a Mark 1 eyeball with medium optics from 1948. I've actually tried quite a bit to make this work, right? Like 15 RPM, yes, you have only 2 HE, but 15 RPM 2 HE is the same as like 10 RPM 3 HE, right? Which is pretty good for 10 points. But then you have no accuracy, no AP, and no range, and no speed, and no autonomy. Which means you have to get close to shoot, to hit in the first place. But you can't because you have no speed. Or, sorry, it takes forever to get because you have no speed. But then, once you get there, you already run out of fuel, so you can't get there. And if you end up shooting at max range, you won't hit because you have no accuracy. Even if you hit every now and then, you won't deal damage because you have no AP or HE, right? So, yeah, just, I mean, if you want to, you can use it. It has medium optics. That's what it has going for it, I suppose. But I wouldn't recommend it. Another AT100, ATS103. It has medium optics. It has good range for the price. Kind of like a Marta VTS1. And instead of the AP, you get RPM. So it can be like an okay, double S okay fire support. Problem is just it won't really be that great against vehicles either because it has only 2 armor. So yeah, that's where it struggles. If it had like 4 or 5 armor, it can't be like a good standoff anti-IV unit, if you will. Flame tank is a flame tank. ZDF is kind of like a cheaper version of the WC550. Because even 2800 meters range is pretty rare on vehicles. And it still hits quite hard. It has okay accuracy. And it has 2 frontal side armor, so it doesn't instantly die. And of course, it's cheaper. But also the missile is slower. It's less consistent, doesn't hit as hard, blah blah blah. But yeah, it's a solid option. It's a solid option for a vehicle type unit. And then the ZSU, which is probably one of the best units in this thing because the anti-ground gun or capabilities got buffed quite a bit with Italy, namely the range, or only the range, but that's helps quite a bit. It's really nice. It's okay as far as support. It's not so great versus helicopters, let alone planes, but at least it can shoot back, and with 5 front armor, it's not gonna die too quickly to rocket pods. But it's very nice offensive fire support and has acceptable autonomy and speed to do that. Helicopters, okay. Well, the MD500s, honestly, they get worse with each consecutive one. HS-17 is probably the best out of all of these. They're all just little birds, right? HS-17, which flies without pilots. Interesting. Just like the American little bird. Once it gets firing, it will just delete infantry within like 2 seconds. crazy high rate of fire, crazy damage output on this AGS-17, the twin AGS-17. Problem is just it also dies very fast. And it has to be pretty close. It has some turret, etc., etc. But when it fires... but yeah, the lack of survivability, even against like basic MG squads, is just holding it back. But it's probably for the better. It's not useless, just niche. Rocket pod helicopter, if you have a fob, can be okay. Like you get basically an MI8 but faster and smaller, but also less HP. And bad miss ITGMs. MI4 has just a lot of rocket pods, so it's not bad, right? It's just not the most impactful rocket pods out there, right? It's also slow and clunky. At least it carries a lot. But if you really want the rocket pod helicopter, maybe go for this. But the Mi-25 is probably just your best, like, all-round fire support helicopter. The Yakbi is really good. You have lots of speed, HP. And the Flame Tech can help against, like, light vehicles. It's not gonna, like, rock your world, but it's like a good all-round, while still being affordable kind of helicopter. And the M8 gunship just wishes it was that, but it's just useless all around. It's honestly, in my eyes, your best in a tank helicopter. It's a good helicopter in general, right? Eurocore has the same thing. Quite good. For 40 points, you get very good ATGM. You're very fast. Obviously on a 4G, but you're very small, so harder to hit. And with the speed, if you migrate a bit and pay attention and notice the first missile missed, maybe you can fly out of range, right? Yeah. I think for 40 points, you get really strong anti-tank capabilities. Same thing as above. This should be your prime anti-tank plane helicopter, but like for 20 points, 50% more. Get a bit more range, which is not nothing by any means. At the extra range, you really notice them on ATGMs. 2 more AP, a bit more accuracy, HP, speed, lose a bit of speed, but same speed basically. Like on paper and in practice, it's not the worst upgrade, but I still feel like the HOT is just a better choice. Because with the HOT, you also, if you quickly need something just to do like a BRDM3 or something like that, can somewhat shoot back. But isn't it like the tankiest of tanks? HOT 1 paying only 40 points, much less of an issue. Right, but then having to pay 60 points suddenly, ugh. It's not a bad helicopter, I just think the HOT is better. TY90. I wouldn't recommend, honestly, putting this into your deck in a 1 versus 1 deck. Unless you specifically know what you're going up against, or you know you will go up against helicopters, I wouldn't use this. Because for 90 points, you buy something that only kills helicopters and potentially planes if you're lucky, but that's not what this role is. So if you spend these 90 points, and there's no helicopter for you to kill, you spend 90 points on something that after the opener is hard to make use of. It's not useless, it can still protect your flank, or you can just reroute this if you know there's like a helicopter flying around the flank or something, or broke through or whatever. But it's still 90 points that potentially does nothing. Something like a TAP, something like a Zephyr E. They have additional capabilities, both when it comes to what units they can shoot at, and in form of the TAP even has medium optics, all for a lower price. This is just so on the deep end of countering helicopters that it can also be like just dead points, right? In team games, however, where maybe for certain points you could basically guarantee that your opponent will send helicopters there, or you're recovering for a teammate. First of all, the 90 points is much less of a percentage over your for your team's points, right? And there's a much higher chance that you will get value out of this, right? So it's a different story. But for 1 versus 1s, I wouldn't recommend this. Just way too specialized for something that just will never and not always happen. Planes. A5I, slow. If it was 1000 kmh, I think it would be decent. For the speed, it's hard to use. It will very often be one-way ticket. So, and even then, with the speed, it can sometimes be stunned before it even gets the bombs off. The multi-role capabilities aren't the greatest excuse me, either. Yeah, not so great. B5, now 2 per card again. Well, I say now. Didn't happen with the South Africa patch, right? It's a B5. I think everybody knows what it does, right? 15 strength. So 2 rolling shots can't kill it, for example. Flies really high too. And the bomb hits like a truck. What else needs to be said? Bad napalm plane. An odd rocket pod plane. It has a really low amount of rockets. So it will actually very rarely kill something. Can stun though. I think if you right click on something like a 1 armor unit, you will kill it. And I think 2 armor upwards. Not sure if you can really consistently kill that. I'll be honest. I use this too infrequently. Not the worst, because it's only 40 points. This is bad. This is if you want like a very cheap, very fast plane to like spot helicopters in the opener. That can be an option. Right? That in and of itself can be like an important role to have in team games, where like one of the 4 players just gets 2 or 3 of those in the opener, purely to spot if like as early as you can for like a helicopter drop or something. Can be very useful for that. In team games, sorry, 1v1s can be fine if you just have the slot for some reason. Other than that, it obviously won't kill too much. Especially because with AA around or something, you can't circle this for too long to try to snipe a helicopter. But if just like a helicopter flying around the flank or something where there's no AA, that can be good for that. Just keep in mind you have only 2 missiles with low accuracy, so that's bad. The J7s, both of them are good. J7H better than the C variant. The 120 HE bomb is better than 215 HE bombs. Also get better at PL8s, right? Short range missiles. So it can be okay to deal at least some damage against a helicopter, but you really want to evac this ASAP, because with 0 ECM and poor turn radius, you do not want to invite your opponent to send their ASF out. And this is basically just a cheaper option of the F7, right? Even worse missiles, no ECM, and then the slightly more expensive variants with 10% ECM, but 4 missiles. And then we have this thing here, which is more ECM, same speed in ECM, but better missiles and even more missiles. And the J8C, which is a pretty good like medium range ASF, like an F16A, now with more accuracy on the PL11s, making this a pretty solid supercard elite ASF. Not much else needs to be said. Decent ECM, decent missiles, good speed. J7, with the range buff on the ATGMs, really nice because it has the survivability. It has pretty, like, for its price, has really good ECM and okay motor capabilities. Obviously, similar to the infantry-based AT, this being your best in a tank plane can be a bit annoying, especially unlike the Eurocore, which have a similar quote-unquote issue with the Peace Rhine. You don't have like infantry-based heavy anti-tank units. So again, you notice this a lot more that you only have 26 AP missiles on your ATGM planes, but it's still very, very good actually. The quote-unquote best seed plane. It does have the best seed missiles in the game. Pretty sure the only ones with 70% accuracy, and the only ones with 30 AP. It's the only seed plane that can and will one-shot a Challenger marksman up front. Which isn't like an important threshold to have, but it's worth pointing out. And I suppose if you use it against ships, the AP will also matter. But of course, being a quote-unquote high-end seaplane, it also only has 40% ECM and not 50. That said, it got buffed to 2 per card at some point, which somewhat makes up for it at least. Would be stronger if it had only like 2 missiles and it was like 120 points or 125 points. But it is what it is. Yuchen didn't want to do that change. This is bad, this is also really bad. Semi-active with no accuracy and horrible availability. If you got this at like 3 on Elite, it might be okay. A cheap, hardened, like 4-card ASF can be okay if you just spam 4 of them. It will just murder planes, but also like dies very quickly and will be inconsistent. This is like your alternative to the J8C. It's a bit more high end in the sense that it has two sets of Final Frigate missiles, with the R-27T having a range buff of like 1800 meters with the Italy patch, and of course still being able to shoot at helicopters, which is really neat. And both missiles have more than 5 HP or more, which helps a lot. Yeah, comes on veteran as opposed to elite. A pretty good option now. Before, it just really struggled versus planes because it didn't have the range on the second set of missiles. So it was kind of like a Lazur on steroids. It's still kind of physical against helicopters because of its HE values on the missiles and such. Yeah. Cheap rocket plane, you know. Very similar to the A5i, right? Presumably the same plane. You get more ECM though, less accuracy, and worse missiles, but 10% ECM, right? Probably worth the ECM, honestly. Q-50 is your second option, or the other good option of anti-tank planes. It will almost one-shot three top armor tanks, assuming they hit both bombs. But again, unlike the Kurnas or the Nighthawk, this is only really used to shoot at, like, to right-click on units that you spot. If you fire precision with this, you will be not very useful. So I wouldn't do that because then you might just die. Way too risky with way too little payoff. Unless you desperately need to snipe like a CV or something. But only really use this to right click on units and don't try to blind fire with this. It's not gonna do too much. 25k. You save 30 points and lose the rocket pods compared to like the Czech or the Soviet variant, which isn't really worth it in my eyes. In general, I'm not a huge fan of this plane. It flies very low. It needs to be close. Has no ECM, not best speed. The two front armor doesn't have that much because very often, by the time the enemy missile is about to hit you, you will likely have already flown over the AAPs if you didn't turn around, or you have turned around, right? Which is why the two rear armor is so crucial on the 25T, and probably a lot more impactful than the two front armor in many situations. 27 SK. The problem with this is just it only has 50% base accuracy on the missiles. And while this one only has 45, right? Both on veteran, these things are semi-active. But you get some ECM, but you also only have 50% and not 60 on these missiles. It's just very disappointing, this plane. It's not gonna be very consistent for its price. And then if a rocket pod plane that will deal a lot of damage, these like 64 S5M rocket pods, they will, I think, kill up to 5 armor. If you, assuming you right click and not fire precision, because then they could like drive a bit out of the AoE. Lots of damage output, but also no survivability, right? No ECM, low flight altitude, no missiles to defend itself against helicopters or planes, and not the best speed. Like rocket pod planes also not really the greatest in this deck. Not like that really is an important thing. But even there, it doesn't really shine. Yeah, Red Dragons, I think, just has a lot of these like medium range kind of units, as medium range as in like price range of categories, right? Medium tier ASFs, medium tier anti-tank planes, medium tier bombers or low tier bombers, medium tier price wise, anti-air, artillery, recurse rifle, infantry, and such, right? But once you get into the high tier, that's where the units are usually just pretty bad. Yeah, it really lives off of a few units. Like the WC and the Tankeshasho combo is like really strong. The anti-air is really good, and the artillery. CDQs are good. You can really bomber spam with this, but there will be like matchups and like situations where you just won't have a tool available that pretty much any other coalition has, which is a shame. But it still has really its own identity. Either way, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you in the next deep dive. Bye bye.